every Friday we are here thanks to American TESOL. We record all of these. We have over 100 of these different recordings, and you're more than welcome to join us every single Friday. We also have all the resources that we bookmark, and you can receive a certificate of attendance, or you can receive a tech certification if you're part of the esltech.com course, and that is free for American TESOL members. So we're going to talk today about teaching with comics. Last week we talked about different types of writing with digital tools, and we talked about things like brainstorming and bookmarking and how to go through the process of writing and different types of digital tools for that. But this week, in the next few weeks, we're going to talk about specific types of writing and specific types of tools. Today, we talk about comics. Now, if you want to learn more about comics and to see the tools in this presentation, you'll actually be able to see it by going to the Pearl Tree. So each week we have bookmarks that you're more than welcome to access for free, and including you can also access the recordings, but you can also download the slides already as well. So don't feel like you have to write every single thing down, because you can find them at the bookmarks that I just put inside the chat box. Comics can be quite engaging. Comics are actually very accepted even academically. When I was, one of the things that I do is I organize them free online conferences for teachers worldwide. And they're very much like this, where you can see the presenters on a webinar. And one of the presenters I had at my past one at the Reform Symposium was Nick Sosanis. And Nick Sosanis is in this incredible teacher and also researcher who did his PhD from Columbia University in comic form. So comics are not only tools that you use for small basic writing, but they have some depth to them. So you can do some interesting research, and you can also do longer pieces of writing with comic books. Many times, and someone mentioned in chat box, I think it was the other Shelley, mentioned how there were graphic novels, and graphic novels do have a lot of academic language. In a lot of comic books that we know of with superheroes, Spider-Man, where did it take place? Well, it took place in a lab, and so there are some different types of science principles that students can grasp just through reading comic books about heroes, so about the famous superheroes. So comics do have a range of subjects, they have a range of depth, and they can be used to teach and get students interested in academic language. What I love about comics, so we're going to talk first as comics as learning materials, and then we'll go into different types of tools and ideas for you on how to teach with comics. But when you think about learning with comics, comics are actually very good for the brain. They're brain friendly. They're great for language learners. Why? Well, one of our well-known theorists that we learn about when we are learning to be teachers is Vygotsky. And Vygotsky talks about chunking language and how that's good for the brain. And Vygotsky also talks about how when we chunk language, but also how the comics are formed in frames, that really helps the brain. And for language learners, it also has the graphics and the visuals to really help learners understand the context of the material that they're learning. So it's very, very good for language learners. It's good for those students that suffer with literacy or maybe aren't the best readers, They can see it in different frames, and then their brain can process what's going on. It has little clues within the different frames to give them an idea of what's happening. And they can really start to develop reading skills, because what the brain does is when it doesn't know a word or it doesn't understand what's going on in the dialogue, it can look within the frame, and it can get an idea, and it can start to make guesses. It can start making inferences. And so it actually develops their literacy quite well. One of the best, and he's not in here right now, but sometimes he is Grammar Man. Grammar Man's from Thailand, and he's a teacher there, and he gets students to make lots of great YouTube videos, but he also does a comic. So you can see it. I've already bookmarked it here. He has YouTube videos to go with the different types of comics he has, but he has tons of comics, and they talk about one of the toughest subjects, which is grammar. It can teach students about uncountable nouns and really get into the details of grammar. So it's one of the best resources for language learners and teachers. There's other types of comics as well. So there are graphic novels. So you can usually go to different types of bookstores, and or ones that you already use. Maybe you use Penguin, or maybe you use Pearson, maybe you use Macmillan, and all of them will have what's called readers. And in these readers, you will often see that they have a comic form. So if you're teaching a particular novel or textbook, you can ask those companies that you already usually teach with, and you can ask them for readers and ask what they have that is specific to with comics. Or you can look for the comics in you can, whatever book that you teach, you can also, and it doesn't matter if it's for young learners or if it's for much older learners, you can usually find a comic form. But there is the Marvel Comics app as well. It's free. There's things like, for example, Diary of a Wimpy Kid, which is a book, and it's kind of like a mesh. It's a book, but it also has some comics within it. If you look at whatever you're teaching, like if you have a favorite book you're teaching, just do a Google search or ask the publisher and see if they have the comic form, and usually they do. And they have free lesson plans, so that's always very nice. Like Diary of a Wimpy Kid, you can go to wimpykid.com and find games and movies and lesson plans. Even with Twilight, you find the graphic novel of Twilight. You can find it of Pride and Prejudice. So there are different types of graphic novels and comics out there, even for your most advanced readings. And even for class 6, one of the news articles I was reading was how in Japan they had many different types of graphic novels that had to deal with Shakespeare. When I was teaching my language learners in high school about Shakespeare, many times I would try to find comic materials because it was much easier to teach them what was happening with the graphic novels. So that's always something to look at as well. And now let's get to the fun part, because one of the fun ways to learn language and to learn about a topic like math or science or English or history or even geography, is with comic creation tools and apps. So you can get your students to begin to use these free comic creation tools to be able to create their own comics. And this could be to sequence events. Like if they're learning about history, then it's very easy for them to sequence that within a comic. Also, you can use it for them to tell you what happened, sort of as a review, so they can go back after a reading or after they heard you reading a story to them, or even reading an article or a chapter or a scene. And what they can do is they can retell the events, and that's a really great way for them to be able to um, go back and make a connection, and also put the visual and the context that goes with that particular reading. So what I'm going to do is, there's so many, there's actually hundreds and hundreds of comics tool out there that are also available on your mobile device. So not only can you create it with your mobile device, but you can do it on a computer. And the best way to share it with you is to actually go and to tell you what these are, but also give you ideas for teaching. So these are some of the ideas I've used that I want to share with you. So that's what we're going to talk about. Now, one of my favorite ones that is for teachers and students for comics, and it's also not only for teachers, that it's also for example, language teachers as well, which is Make Believe's comic. So Make Believe's comic, you don't even have to register to use it right away. But what you can do is, it has like, I think, over 7 different languages. You can even use in French and English and Spanish and different languages out there. So Make Believe's comics, that's the one to use. You can create comics. But not only can you create comics, but it has a free iPad app. It is only for the iPad though. But it's online on the computer, so you can use it on the computer. It's free. But they also have printables. So they have over 350 free printables that teachers can use, or part of it are these wonderful prompts, these writing prompts. And they have it for math, they have it for history, they have it for science, they have it for English. And what I like to do is, I like to put in, for example, an overhead projector in the back, and then I can show it to my students for 5 minutes or 10. I give them to do a quick writing prompt. And they have many different ones that, for example, will get your students to create dialogues like they have here for Christopher Columbus, or they have some to simply get them to do longer pieces of writing. You have also TuneDo is one of the other ones that I would definitely recommend for teachers. These are my top ones. Now the great thing about TuneDo is, it's not only in comic form, but TuneDo will actually let you do things where you can create a book. So you can actually create a book with TuneDo. Has more friendly characters that are more visual too. And you can choose the scenery and the background, but you notice how it's all in frames? Even Make Believe Comics is in frames. Now you do have to sign up for TuneDo. It's free though. Um, and what you can do is, you can do things like create dialogue. So anytime that your students read, for example, they read an event in history, perhaps they read the Lincoln Douglas debates, yes. And what they can do is, they can recreate those events in a comic form. They have to imagine what Lincoln would say, then they have to go back and they have to imagine what Douglas, they have to imagine the crowd in the back, they have to do research of what it looked, the history back then, what the context looked like, the scenery, the background. And I have rubrics. I always grade with rubrics. I'll show you that at the end. But that's the way I use. So you can use comics to have them recreate dialogues from what they read. This is actually from one of my students, and it's actually exploring different types of language here. She actually, in different colors, highlighted the grammar points. So your students can go and do that as well. They can highlight grammar points or vocabulary that they give them to use in the comic. This one is actually one where they use the Marvel comic. Marvel has where you can create your own comic. They used to have where you could create your own where you could also create your own graphic novel, but they recently actually did away with that. So unfortunately, that's no longer something that you can do, but I believe you can still create your own comic. So I will give you the Marvel comic link to that. So you can use it with your favorite characters, Spider-Man and different characters that students recognize. So they can explore character. They can explore character from a book that they read about, They can explore a historical figure. They can do it on someone with in a biography. So one of the assignments I had, for example, for math was I had to write a report, and it was about Rene Descartes. So they can always make a comic about Rene Descartes and talk about the events. And that would be very interesting to explore a character, even the biography of a character. You also can do where you can share digital stories, so they can create comics. There's the Garfield. Garfield.com has a great one, and that's very friendly for little kids. There's one called phrase.it. Now that is actually for your mobile device, phrase.it. And phrase.it is also where you can make comics out of characters from so pictures that you have. So comics can take different types of forms. What I like about this particular comic is that it actually gets students to take things from their surroundings, and they can make it into a comic. So that's really nice. One of my favorite apps for that is also Comics Head, and that's a free app as well. So here you have where they had the little dogs. And they can actually put even things like motivational quotes. So they can animate an object, they can animate an animal, and bring it to life with comics. They can actually make different types of word problems with math. One of the people who does this is Row Thinks. He has many different types of um, comics that you have for math word problems that he puts. Here he poses one about jelly beans and says to justify your answer. You can transform a piece of literature. That's one of the ways that I get my students to that's one of the lessons they do each semester with me. They have plenty of great examples. They can transform a piece of literature or an article that they'll be using with their students, or also a piece of poetry. So here you can see Pride and Prejudice that my students did. The great thing is once you do this, you can also use this to introduce and get your students interested in that piece of literature. So instead of showing them just the book and say, hey, we're going to read Pride and Prejudice, to where not all of them will be enthused, you can show them the comic form and introduce them to the characters this way. And then they get an understanding before they start the chapter. So you can use it as pre-writing as well. And then they can go back and they can do their own form of transforming that literature. Here's where one of my students with comicshead.com, and that's for iOS and that's for Android as well. I love this. Comics Head, it allows you to do your own comics with your own pictures. You can even draw within it. You can take a stylus pen, you can draw. You could do this with your Android, or you can do this with an iPad or an iPhone. It's very cool. It's an app, and then you can use their characters. They have so many different characters that you can use as well. So this was to visualize poetry. This particular poem is it is by Maya Angelou, as you can look at here. So you can introduce a lesson with the comic. We kind of talked about that already. You can summarize readings. So what I like to do is actually, if you have a big novel, then what you can do is you can have students work in pairs, and each one is responsible for either a chapter, or they're responsible for a section of that particular novel. So or even with a history book, or even books that you're reading and they have units, they can be responsible for. You could take one chapter or one unit within your textbook, and you can have your students work in pairs and be responsible for the comic that is supposed to be for different paragraphs. They can do that, or different sections, and then at the end you piece it all together. So comiclife.com could be good for that. You can have, for example, if you use the tool, then later on you'll have to go maybe with the Google Doc and put it all together. But this way you have that chapter that they can do. And you just choose which tools that they use it with. Um, Witty comics is more for adults, I think. I think also for even high school students, but political comics are take a lot of intelligence. They actually have a lot going on. And the thing about the language in a political cartoon is if you show them examples ahead of time, which I think is really good, um, then you have to kind of see what they're getting at because it's not it's not literal language. It's usually very figurative because when you're talking about politics, you have to know the political issue that is happening. And so a lot of newspapers have tons of examples of political comics and cartoons. So you can show them a good example of that, of whatever you're teaching. You can even show them the ones from the past, from one that they had in newspapers in the past, and then challenge them to make their own political comics. Wittycomics.com has different types of characters that can be good for writing a political cartoon. And these don't usually have many frames. This usually has just 1 or 2 frames in them. Criaza.com is really good for having comics, and they have different types of characters that come in novels. I mean, that come in different types of fairy tales, but they also have Roman characters. So if you're learning about the Romans, they have tons of characters that relate to that. And what you can do is you can have it from a different point of view. So instead of, for example, Goldilocks or Little Red Riding Hood having the story and have it told from the bear's point of view. You can have it told from the big bad wolf's point of view. So this is a different type of way that they're telling that particular story and rethinking about. And you can teach a lot of things with that. You can teach about, for example, cultural differences. You can talk about gender differences. You can talk about the past. So you can go into a lot of issues this way as well. You can talk about, hey, well, maybe the 3 little bears were the ones that were picked on. And maybe they just decided that that Goldilocks was the because she's a female, they thought she was the victim, but what if it was the other way around? So you can really get your student to think of a different person's point of view. And also you can relate it to bullying, so there's different ways that you can use that particular idea. You can do it for different types of interviews. So your students, and even if you're doing, for example, if you have a class newspaper, and in the class newspaper, you could have a section of comics, right? But also, if you're doing interviews, so let's say, of course, what comes to mind is interviewing each other. So they can interview each other and they can post this in a comic form. But how many of you might Skype or do a Google Hangout with someone? So whenever you do a Skype or Google Hangout with a guest expert, or even if you have a guest come and talk to the classroom, have one of your students or a couple of your students, they're the reporters. So they write down what kind of questions and what were the answers from that interview. And what you can do is then you can post this interview, have some other students be responsible for posting that in comic form. And you could talk about how to make a comic. To comics, you have to really think about when you're creating the background scenes, choosing the characters to where it poses things in a friendly sort of way. And so you can talk about the different elements and how, by presenting those elements, or choosing certain characters, then you make it seem more professional or like you're not making fun of something, versus you would choose other elements to make fun of something. So you can talk about what that means. You can explore societal issues with a comic. So this one is with stripgenerator.com, and it talks about bullying. But you can have your students at the beginning brainstorm and talk about what it is. For example, if you're presenting the rules and you want them to be good citizens, then at the beginning you can say, okay, so how do we become good citizens? How do we help each other have how do we act in ways that will really help us to have peace within our classroom, okay? Because we're a community. And they can give you a list of ideas. They can say, well, I won't interrupt my fellow peer, well, my friend. They could say, oh, well, when I'm giving feedback, I'll make sure to say nice things. And they can you can list a bunch of these on your board or somewhere. And then you can have them make comics that really explore these issues, that really talk about cyberbullying or how to act. So you can have a comic for each rule or a comic for each issue that you might have within the classroom. But have your students make these comics, because sometimes there are some topics and they're very hard to approach because they're very difficult, like cyberbullying or being mean to someone. It's really difficult, and students might get very shy and may not, they might laugh at it because it's uncomfortable. So comic is a good way to present these uncomfortable issues, so that way students will be open to them and can really explore them. You can recreate a scene from history. This is once again from Phrase It and the different characters from Phrase It. You can explore the language and jokes, because a lot of times jokes in a language, jokes aren't always cross-cultural. Sometimes they are. I was in Venezuela and I saw literally um, a chicken cross a road, and it was a busy highway, and I started laughing because I thought it was very funny. And I asked another teacher that was in Venezuela, and I said, do you have this joke? Why did the chicken cross the road? Because when I was in, for example, Germany, in Germany, they don't have knock knock jokes. Knock knock jokes seem to be an American type of joke. And so he said yes, and he told me it was something with Guyana. It's what they used for this joke of why did the chicken cross the road, but it was very funny. So you can explore the language and jokes and also culture. How to accomplish a goal. So you can ask them at the beginning, what is a learning goal you want to accomplish, or what are goals that you want to accomplish this year as a student? Do you want, for example, some of them might want to be better at the sport, some might want to be better at um, at playing the guitar, some might want to um, read so many amount of books. So you can make it related to a learning goal, or could be related also to a personal goal. And then they can post these and they can revisit them to see if they've accomplished that goal or how they're doing with those goals. One of my favorite ways to use comics, and this idea I actually took from howtoons.com. So you can't make a comic with howtoons.com, but you can see great examples of how howtoons.com takes comics to give you instructions for very scientific or difficult kind of things to do, like for example making ice cream. So explore howtoons.com. It's great for CLIL. It's great for content language integrated learning, or it's content language integrated learning, yes. Or it's good for STEAM if you're teaching math or engineering, or it has so many great instructions, and they're visual instructions. And then you can have your students take one of the many, many, many comics that I've shared with you, comic creators, and they can create their own instructions. Have them create these instructions to help a family member, to help, for example, maybe students in a younger class. So for example, you can have high school students make instructions for middle school students, or you can have 10-year-olds make them for 5-year-olds, and they have to think about their audience and the language. They can show you how to do something that they're really good at, how to, for example, maybe make tea, or how to give a presentation. You can have it to highlight the rules. We did talk about that. Explore the different definitions of a word, because sometimes a word can be used in different ways, and your students can explore how to use that, because sometimes I noticed in their essays that sometimes they try to use a word and they don't use it in the correct way. You can post a debate so they can explore and research different parts of an issue that they are for or against, and they can put that in a comic. They can put issues for a particular. You can give them something like, do you believe that Lincoln, and the Emancipation Proclamation, what do you believe? Or that you can have a different debates on different issues. Here's Nick Sansoni's his thesis, his doctoral thesis he did for where he visualized his research. So you can make comics that have a lot of depth to them. This is actually the spin weave, and you can see his process. He's just amazing. And you can of course see all of these um, in the bookmarks at the end of this presentation. Read, Write, Think has many, many interactives that will walk students through the process of comic creation, but they also give you lots and lots of lesson plans. And of course, all of these tools I'm sharing have a free version, because teachers need free versions. Shogger.com is another one that's good for you. And we're going to go ahead and wrap up already. So you can find all of these different types of comic creation ideas, examples, and also tools. And the slideshow, if you simply go to this Pearl Trees, you'll see my Symbaloo, where I have comic creation apps and resources for students. And then, of course, you can always go and you can connect with me. You can go to shellyturtle.com/webinars. You can go to American TESOL site. They will have a recording of this, esltech.com, or the American TESOL has also, you can find a blog that shows all the recordings and the bookmarks and everything at American TESOL. I'm putting the address here. .com. So americantesol.com, they also have a blog. They also have all of these. If you go to the YouTube channel, which is ATESOL, ATESOL, you'll find